Hi, this is Margo. This is Saturday afternoon, September the 26th, 2020, and this is a special show today. I'm going to do part 2 of how to wreck the environment. I started this in December of 2018, and I did part 1 on December the 8th of 2018. There's that. It's on my YouTube channel. I will leave the link below. This is a book excerpt from a book called Unless Peace Comes, and I was prompted to do part 2. I never did part 2 of how to wreck the environment. I got sidetracked and did a whole bunch of other stuff, but I think in order for us to understand what's going on now, we need to look at the past and look and see what plans, what the different countries and nations and militaries were looking at in possible weather modification, climate modification, warfare, things like that. So we're in such turbulent times. I do believe we are in the end times, and I didn't think we'd still be here now, frankly. I thought we'd be gone by now, but we're still here. A lot's changed. The world is a different place than it was even 2 years ago, and it's getting more toxic and harder to be here on a daily basis for all of us. And I've been primarily posting for my members on Subscribestar on a daily basis, monitoring the different climate items, methane, and looking at the sea ice and reporting on earthquakes and different things, and reading from the Bible, because I think we need to get our spiritual houses in order and get ready to leave this world. So as I had some of my members asking me what I meant by beaming, and so if you haven't been following my work for a while, you might not know, but so I put a post up about it, and I did some videos back in 2019 about it. But then I was thinking, it prompted me to look back through this, and I realized I had not done part 2. I had not finished this paper that I really wanted to finish. So I'm going to finish it today. So I will leave links below on where you can find this paper. This is a book excerpt. It's a chapter from Unless Peace Comes that was published in 1968. And the book was a compilation of scientific forecast of new weapons, a compilation from 16 different military advisors from different countries around the planet, around the world, edited by Nigel Calder, and they all presented their chapters on what the worst case scenario might be for the forecast of weapons, military weapons. It included all kinds of things. Anyway, I never got the book. But I did get a lot out of reading this chapter that is for free and published, and it's by the U.S. participant or contributor Gordon J.F. MacDonald, and his chapter was called How to Wreck the Environment, and in part one of this, when I presented this back in December of 2018, I did some background research on Gordon MacDonald and presented that, and he was he knew all about climate change and the heating of the planet, and he was on the Science Advisory Committee for President Johnson, and was warning of CO2 levels and burning of fossil fuels and all that. And nobody listened. Nobody listened then. I mean, he was just one of many voices out there trying to warn the powers that be that they needed to change things, change the way they were doing things. But he was on the inside and could see. He had a broad view of a broad vision, and so I got about halfway through the chapter, so I'm going to finish it today. But I want to start by just rereading this, the introduction by Nigel Calder. He says, with its telling and dispassionate prose, and with its life or death message, this remarkable and urgently important book should and must chill the hearts and sober the thoughts of anyone who reads it. Nigel Calder is a widely known and respected English science writer and editor. For many years he edited London's New Scientist, which achieved a reputation and influence far beyond its circulation. In this volume he has marshaled the services of 16 eminent scientists from 6 countries and asked them from the vantage points of their own disciplines to set down their projections of warfare in the future. No layman who reads this will ever be likely again to characterize the whole scientific community as either oblivious or uncaring. As the French authors of the chapter on chemical warfare put it, the question may arise, is all science damned? We must either eliminate science or eliminate war. We cannot have both. There is undeniably a chilling fascination to these glimpses into the future, at robot centipede tanks fused with H-bombs, at nerve gases, at refined missiles and submarines, at bacterial weapons, at the fatal fallacies built into atomic deterrence, at the possibilities of tampering with nature itself, at all the political, scientific, and military nightmares which mankind is striving to make real. Yet there is no danger that any reader will for a moment lose sight of the fact that unless peace comes, is not an extrapolative catalogue of the gadgetry of warfare, but an awesome underlying of the hugest moral imperative in the history of mankind. Well, that was written by someone else, the forward there, but anyway, that was an introduction. And, this was 1968, so since then, we've reached the singularity. We're probably living in a simulation now, run by AI, and it's an overlay, it's a satanic overlay of the natural world, and things are not going very well. Everything's falling apart, and it's not going well. So, anyway, let's get on with it. How to Wreck the Environment by Gordon J.F. MacDonald, USA. Professor MacDonald is Associate Professor of the Institute of Geophysics and Planetary Physics at the University of California, Los Angeles. His researches have embraced a remarkable diversity of natural phenomena, and his professional interests are further extended by his participation in national science policy making. He is a member of President Johnson's Science Advisory Committee. Of course, he's deceased since then, since this was written, but anyway, we ended down here. So this is what, 10 pages long, something like that. I got halfway through. He talks about weather modification. These are all, in 1968 they were experimenting, they were talking about possibilities, but since then, of course, we've got 5G and we've got, they can target things from space and everything. They were waiting for the whole Internet of Things. They were waiting for this moment in time for global domination and global control of the weather and the climate and everything, and they're not doing a very good job. Here's climate modification. And I ended at this paragraph. Frankly, when I was doing the reading, I got too depressed. I remember now, and I just had a sinking feeling and couldn't go on any further. So, I'm all prayed up and ready to go today. So I'm going to pick up where we left off with, we're on climate modification, where they were talking about sending rockets up into the atmosphere to release materials to change the climate. Basically geoengineering, which they've been doing for a long time. So I'm going to start right here. So the last sentence in that paragraph was, "At present we know too little about the paradoxical effects of warming and cooling, however, to tell what the outcome might be." Okay, so that's where part 1 ended. Now we're going to pick up. More sudden, perhaps much briefer, but nevertheless disastrous effects are predictable if chemical or physical means were developed for attacking one of the natural constituents of the atmosphere, ozone. A low concentration of ozone, or O3, a rare molecular form of oxygen, in a layer between 15 and 50 kilometers altitude has the utmost significance for life on land. It is responsible for absorbing the great part of the ultraviolet from the sun. In mild doses, this radiation causes sunburn. If the full force of it were experienced at the surface, it would be fatal to all life, including farm crops and herds that could not take shelter. The ozone is replenished daily, but a temporary hole in the ozone layer over a target area might be created by physical or chemical action. For example, ultraviolet of 250 millimicrons wavelength decomposes ozone molecules, and ozone reacts readily with a wide range of materials. At present, we can only tentatively speculate about modifying the shortwave radiation at its source, the sun. We have discovered major instabilities on the sun's surface which might be manipulated many years hence. In a solar flare, for example, 10 to the 10 megatons of energy are stored in distorted magnetic fields. With advanced techniques of launching rockets and setting off large explosions, we may sometime in the future learn to trigger these instabilities. For the near future, however, modification will not be in the short-wave incoming radiation, but in the long-wave outgoing radiation. The usual schemes for modifying climate involve the manipulation of large ice fields. The persistence of these large ice fields is due to the cooling effects of the ice itself, both in reflecting rather than absorbing incoming short-wave radiation and in radiating heat at a higher rate than the usual ground cover. A commonly suggested means of climate modification involves thin layers of colored material spread on an icy surface, thus inhibiting both the reaction and radiation processes, melting the ice and thereby altering the climate. Such a procedure presents obvious technical and logistic difficulties. For example, if one wished to create a surface coating of as little as 1 micron thickness to cover a square 1,000 kilometers in size, the total material for this extremely thin coating would weigh 1,000,000 tons or more, depending upon its density. So the proposals to dust from the air some of the globe's extended ice sheets are unrealistic and reflect a brute force technique, taking no advantage of instabilities within the environment. While it may be technologically difficult to change an ice cap's surface character, and thus its thermal properties, it may be possible to move the ice, taking into account the gravitational instability of ice caps. The gravitational potential energy of water as a thick, high ice cap is much greater than it would be at sea level. This fact makes it possible, at least in principle, to devise schemes for bringing about a redistribution in the ice. Indeed, A.T. Wilson has proposed a cyclical theory for the ice ages based on this instability. The main points of Wilson's theory are as follows. 1. Antarctica is covered by an ice sheet several kilometers thick. Pressure at the bottom of the ice is great enough to keep the ice at or near its melting point. Water is an unusual material in that a pressure increase lowers rather than raises its melting point. An increase in thickness of the ice sheet could result in melting at the bottom. The resulting ice-water mixture along the sole of the glacier would permit flow by a process of freezing and melting, a flow process much more effective than ordinary plastic flow. 2. If such an instability occurs, the ice sheet will flow out onto the surrounding sea, and a large ice shelf will be formed between Antarctica and the ocean around it. As a consequence, short-wave solar radiation will be reflected, and there will be enhanced loss of heat by radiation at the long wavelengths, causing cooling and the inducement of worldwide glaciation. 3. Once the ice shelf is in the ocean, it will begin to melt and eventually will be removed. The ice remaining on land will be much thinner than before. As the reflectivity of the southern hemisphere decreases with the melting of the Antarctic ice cap, the global climate will grow warmer again. corresponding to the start of an interglacial period. The ice cap will slowly form again. Commenting on Wilson's theory, J.T. Holland has noted the possibility of a catastrophic surge or advance of the ice sheet, such as has been recorded from small glaciers on numerous occasions. The largest surge yet reported is probably that of the ice cap in Spitsbergen, which advanced up to 21 kilometers on a front of 30 kilometers sometime between 1935 and 1938. There are also reports of glacial advances at speeds up to 100 meters per day. Holland speculates that, once the bottom melting phase of a gravitationally unstable ice cap is reached, it will move quickly. In addition to trapped geothermal heat melting the ice at the bottom, there are additional contributions from frictional heat generated as the glacier scrapes along the solid ground. If the speculative theory of Wilson is correct, and there are many attractive features to it, then a mechanism does exist for catastrophically altering the Earth's climate. The release of thermal energy, perhaps through nuclear explosions along the base of an ice sheet, could initiate outward sliding of the ice sheet, which would then be sustained by gravitational energy. 1 megaton of energy is sufficient to melt about 100 million tons of ice. 100 megatons of energy would convert 0.1 centimeters of ice into a thin layer of water covering the entire Antarctic ice cap. Lesser amounts of energy suitably placed could undoubtedly initiate the outward flow of the ice. What would be the consequences of such an operation? The immediate effect of this vast quantity of ice surging into the water, if velocities of 100 meters per day are appropriate, would be to create massive tsunamis or tidal waves, which would completely wreck coastal regions even in the northern hemisphere. There would then follow marked changes in climate brought about by the suddenly changed reflectivity of the Earth. At a rate of 100 meters per day, the center of the ice sheet would reach the land's edge in 40 years. Who would stand to benefit from such application? The logical candidate would be a landlocked equatorial country. An extended glacial period would ensure near Arctic conditions over much of the temperate zone, but temperate climate with abundant rainfall would be the rule in the present tropical regions. Future of weather and climate modification. The foregoing perhaps represents a more positive view of weather and climate modifications than that held by many Earth scientists. I believe this view is justified as it is based on 3 scientific and technological advances. First, understanding of basic meteorology has advanced to such an extent that mathematical models of the atmosphere here have been developed incorporating the most important elements. Physical processes in clouds, in turbulent exchanges at the surface, and in transmission of radiation through the atmosphere are no longer as mysterious as they once were. The volumes simulated by the models range from the size of a single cloud to the entire atmosphere. These models are no longer primitive representations. Secondly, the advent of high-speed computers enables atmospheric models to be studied in greater detail. These computers have a peculiar importance to weather modification, since they will enable scientists to carry out extended experiments to test whether or not various schemes for manipulating the atmosphere are indeed possible and what the outcome should be. The third advance, lending support to expectations for weather and climate modification, is the new array of instruments developed to observe and detect changes in the atmosphere. The most dramatic and perhaps the most powerful is the meteorological satellite, which provides a platform whence the atmosphere can be observed, not only in geographically inaccessible regions, but also with entirely new physical measurements. For example, meteorological satellites of the future will permit the determination of humidity, temperature, and pressure as averaged over substantial volumes of the atmosphere, providing quantities which are needed to develop the mathematical models. Sophisticated surface instrumentation for observing detailed processes within smaller parts of the atmosphere provides us with far more powerful tools with which to look at clouds and at the interaction of the atmosphere with its boundaries than those which were available 10 or 20 years ago. Earthquake modification. What causes earthquakes? Over geological time, the irregular distribution of heat-producing radioactive elements in the rock layers gives rise to subsurface temperature differences between various parts of the Earth. In the continents, granites and similar rocks have concentrated radioactive elements near the surface. No similar concentration has taken place in the sub-ocean regions, which may as a result be more than 100 degrees C cooler than the corresponding subcontinental regions. Such variations in temperature along a horizontal line, due to the differences in the vertical distribution of heat-producing elements, give rise to large thermal stresses, causing strain analogous to that which cracks a glass tumbler filled with hot water. The strain tends to be greatest in regions of abrupt temperature change along a horizontal line through the Earth's crust. The strain may be partially relieved by the slow convective flow of material in the deep Earth, which is thought by some geophysicists to push continents about. But the strain can also be relieved by sharp fractures or by movements along previous faults in rocks near the surface. Movement along a fault radiates energy outward, which results in an earthquake. Each year, approximately 200 megatons of strain energy is released in this fashion. The largest earthquakes corresponding to energy of the order of 100 megatons. The energy released depends on the volume of material affected. The largest earthquakes take place along the faults having a linear dimension of 1,000 kilometers, whereas smaller ones take place along faults of 1 kilometer or less. Major earthquakes tend to be located along two main belts. One belt, along which about 85% of the total energy is released, passes around the Pacific and affects countries whose coastlines border this ocean. For example, Japan and the west coast of North America. The second belt passes through the Mediterranean regions eastwards through Asia and joins the first belt in Indonesia. Along these two belts, large earthquakes occur with varying frequencies. In California, a large earthquake might be expected once every 50 to 100 years, while Chile might expect such a disturbance once every 10 to 20 years. Sometimes major earthquakes have occurred in regions ordinarily thought of as being free from risk. For example, the New Madrid earthquake of 1811 to 1812 devastated a large area of central North America, but had only slight cultural effects because of the area's sparse population. Today, our detailed understanding of the mechanism that causes an earthquake and of how the related instabilities can be triggered is limited. Only within the last few years have serious discussions of earthquake prediction begun, whereas moderately reliable weather forecasts have been available for about the last 30 to 50 years. Currently, substantial effort is being made, primarily by Japan and the United States, to develop techniques for forecasting earthquakes. These techniques are based to a large extent on the determination of changing strain conditions of materials in the rocks surrounding recognized fault zones. Of possible value is the observation that, before an earthquake, the accumulating strain accelerates. Control of earthquakes is a prospect even more distant than that of forecasting, although two techniques have been suggested through recent experience. 1. In the course of the underground testing of nuclear weapons at the Nevada test site, it was observed that an explosion apparently released local strain in the earth. The hypothesis is that the swift buildup of strain due to the sudden release of energy in an explosion discharges strain energy over a large volume of material. 2. Another method of releasing strain energy has appeared from pumping of underground water in the vicinity of Denver, Colorado, which has led to a series of small earthquakes. The hypothesis here is that underground water has provided local lubrication, permitting adjacent blocks to slip by one another. The use as a weapon system of the strain energy instability within the solid earth requires an effective triggering mechanism. A scheme for pumping water seems clumsy and easily detectable. On the other hand, if the strain pattern of the crust can be accurately determined, the phased or timed release of energy from smaller faults designed to trigger a large fault at some distance could be contemplated. This timed release could be activated through small explosions, and thus it might be possible to use this release of energy stored in small faults at some distance from a major fault to trigger that major fault. For example, the San Andreas fault zone, passing near Los Angeles and San Francisco, is part of the Great Earthquake Belt surrounding the Pacific. Good knowledge of the strain within this belt might permit the setting off of the San Andreas zone by timed explosions in the China Sea and Philippine Sea. In contrast with certain meteorological operations, it would seem rather unlikely that such an attack could be carried out covertly under the guise of natural earthquakes. Modification of oceans. We're still in the very early stages of developing the theory and techniques for predicting the state of the oceans. In the past 2 decades, methods have been devised for the prediction of surface waves and surface wind distribution. A warning system for the tsunami or tidal waves produced by the earthquakes has also been developed. Certain currents within the oceans have been identified, but we do not yet know what the variable components are, that is, what the weather within the ocean is. Thus, we have not been able to identify any instabilities within the oceanic circulation that might be easily manipulated. As in the case of the solid Earth, we can only speculate tentatively about how oceanic processes might be controlled. One instability offering potential as a future weapon system is that associated with tsunamis. These frequently originate from the slumping into the deep ocean of loosely consolidated sediments and rocks perched on the continental shelf. Movement of these sediments can trigger the release of vast quantities of gravitational energy, part of which is converted in the motion of the tsunami. For example, if along a 1,000-kilometer edge of a continental shelf, a block 100 meters deep and 10 kilometers wide were dropped a distance of 100 meters, about 100 megatons of energy would be released. This release would be catastrophic to any coastal nation. How could it be achieved? A series of phased explosions, perhaps setting off natural earthquakes, would be a most effective way. I could even speculate on planning a guided tidal wave, where guidance is achieved by correctly shaping the source which releases energy. Brain waves around the world. At heights of 40 to 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface, substantial numbers of charged particles are found which make this part of the atmosphere, the ionosphere, a good conductor of electricity. The rocks and oceans are also more conducting than the lower atmosphere. Thus we live in an insulating atmosphere between 2 spherical conducting shells, or, as the radio engineer would put it, in an Earth ionosphere cavity or waveguide. Radio waves striking either conducting shell tend to be reflected back into the cavity, and this phenomenon is what makes conventional long-distance radio communication possible. Only recently, however, has there been any interest in natural electrical resonances within the Earth ionosphere waveguide. Like any such cavity, the Earth ionosphere waveguide will tend to sustain radio oscillation at certain frequencies in preference to others. These resonant frequencies are primarily determined by the size of the Earth and the speed of light. By the properties of the ionosphere, but the properties of the ionosphere modify them to a certain extent. The lowest resonances begin at about 8 cycles per second, far below the frequencies ordinarily used for radio communication. Because of their long wavelength and small field strength, they are difficult to detect. Moreover, they die down quickly within 1/16th second or so. In engineering terms, the cavity has a short time constant. The natural resonant oscillations are excited by lightning strokes, cloud-to-ground strokes being a much more efficient source than horizontal cloud-to-cloud discharges. On the average, about 100 lightning strokes occur each second, primarily concentrated in the equatorial regions, so that normally about 6 lightning flashes are available to introduce energy before a particular oscillation dies down. A typical oscillation's field strength is of the order of 0.3 millivolts per meter. The power of the oscillations varies geographically. For example, for a source located on the equator in Brazil, the maximum intensity of the oscillation is near the source and at the opposite side of the Earth, around Indonesia. The intensity is lower in intermediate regions towards the poles. One can imagine several ways in which to increase the intensity of such electrical oscillations. The number of lightning strokes per second could be enhanced by artificially increasing their original number. Substantial progress has been made in the understanding of the physics of lightning and how it might be controlled. The natural oscillations are excited by randomly occurring strokes. The excitation of timed strokes would enhance the efficiency with which energy is injected into an oscillation. Furthermore, the time constant of the oscillation would be doubled by a four-field increase in the electrical conductivity of the ionosphere, so that any scheme for enhancing that conductivity, for example by injecting readily ionized vapor, lowers the energy losses and lengthens the time constant, which would permit a greater number of phased lightning strokes before the decay of an oscillation. The enhanced low-frequency electrical oscillations in the Earth ionosphere cavity relate to possible weapon systems through a little understood aspect of brain physiology. Electrical activity in the brain is concentrated at certain frequencies, some of it extremely slow, a little around 5 cycles per second, and very conspicuous activity, the so-called alpha rhythm, around 10 cycles per second. Some experiments have been done in the use of a flickering light to pull the brain's alpha rhythm into unnatural synchrony with it. The visual stimulation leads to electrical stimulation. There has also been work on direct electrical driving of the brain. In experiments discussed by Norbert Wiener, a sheet of tin is suspended from the ceiling and connected to a generator working at 10 cycles per second, with large field strengths of 1 or 2 volts per centimeter oscillating at the alpha rhythm frequency. Decidedly unpleasant sensations are noted by human subjects. The Brain Research Institute of the University of California is investigating the effect of weak oscillating fields on human behavior. The field strengths in these experiments are of the order of a few hundredths of a volt per centimeter. Subjects show small but measurable degradation in performance when exposed to oscillating fields for periods of up to 15 minutes. The field strengths in these experiments are still much stronger, by a factor of about 1,000, than the observed natural oscillations in the Earth ionosphere cavity. However, as previously noted, the intensity of the natural fluctuations could be increased substantially and in principle could be maintained for a long time as tropical thunderstorms are always available for manipulation. The proper geographical location of the source of lightning, coupled with accurately timed artificially excited strokes could lead to a pattern of oscillations that produced relatively high power levels over certain regions of the Earth and substantially lower levels over other regions. In this way, one could develop a system that would seriously impair brain performance in very large populations in selected regions over an extended period. The scheme I have suggested is admittedly far-fetched, but I have used it to indicate the rather subtle connections between variations in man's environmental conditions and his behavior. Perturbation of the environment can produce changes in behavior patterns. Since our understanding of both behavioral and environmental manipulation is rudimentary, schemes of behavioral alteration on the surface seem unrealistic. No matter how deeply disturbing the thought of using the environment to manipulate behavior for national advantage is to some, the technology permitting such use will very probably develop within the next few decades. Secret war and changing relationships. Deficiencies both in the basic understanding of the physical processes in the environment and in the technology of environmental change make it highly unlikely that environmental modification will be an attractive weapon system in any direct military confrontation in the near future. Man already possesses highly effective tools for destruction. Eventually, however, means other than open warfare may be used to secure national advantage. As economic competition among many advanced nations heightens, it may be to a country's advantage to ensure a peaceful, natural environment for itself and a disturbed environment for its competitors. Operations producing such conditions might be carried out covertly, since nature's great irregularity permits storms, floods, droughts, earthquakes, and tidal waves to be viewed as unusual but not unexpected. Such a secret war need never be declared or even known by the affected populations. It could go on for years with only the security forces involved being aware of it. The years of drought and storm would be attributed to unkindly nature, and only after a nation were thoroughly drained would an armed takeover be attempted. In addition to their covert nature, a feature common to several modification schemes is their ability to affect the Earth as a whole. The environment knows no political boundaries. It is independent of the institutions based on geography, and the effects of modification can be projected from one point to any other on the Earth. Because environmental modification may be a dominant feature of future world decades, there is concern that this incipient technology is in total conflict with many of the traditional geographical and political units and concepts. Political, legal, economic, and sociological consequences of deliberate environmental modification, even for peaceful purposes, will be of such complexity that perhaps all our present involvements in nuclear affairs will seem simple. Our understanding of basic environmental science and technology is primitive, but still more primitive are our notions of the proper political forms and procedures to deal with the consequences of modification. All experience shows that less significant technological changes than environmental control finally transform political and social relationships. Experience also shows that these transformations are not necessarily predictable, and that guesses we might make now, based on precedent, are likely to be quite wrong. It would seem, however, that these non-scientific, non-technological problems are of such magnitude that they deserve consideration by serious students throughout the world of society if society is to live comfortably in a controlled environment. That's the end. Here's author's note. In the section on weather modification, I've drawn heavily on weather and climate modification, National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, Washington, ZG 66. A.T. Wilson's paper on origin of ice ages appeared in Nature, Volume AOX, pp. pages Z4Y-GXG64, and J.T. Holland's comments in Volume AOA, pages RA-16R965. Release of tectonic strain by underground nuclear explosion was reported by F. Press and C. Archambault in Journal of Geophysical Research, Volume 67, pages 337 and 43, 1962. And Man-Made Earthquakes in Denver by D. Evans in Geotimes, Volume TO, pages RR-RP. I'm grateful to J. Homer and W. Ross A.D. of the Brain Research Institute of the University of California at Los Angeles for information on the experimental investigation of the influence of magnetic fields on human behavior. That's the end. This is a downloadable PDF document. I will leave the link below. And I suggest you listen to part 1. There's also a video I did before part 1 that was called 50 Years After How to Wreck the Environment by J. Marvin Herndon. And that's how I got turned on to this anyway, in the first place. So, this was a real eye-opener to me, and it's like once you see this, you can't unsee it. And once you see that the powers that be knew about all of these things, and what Gordon MacDonald is describing here is, it's like we're in a time capsule looking back. We're time traveling to the past and seeing the inner workings of the possibilities of, how things could occur and could unfold, and what they were considering. And we see the foundation of HAARP research, and we see the ionospheric heaters and geoengineering, and we see the foundation of the satellite force and directed energy weapons, and the space force, and cell phones, and all the cell phone technology, and everything that we're living in now, this world that we're living in now. They were trying to predict and think about all the different possibilities, but they couldn't, because they were limited. They were just just in the beginnings of even knowing about, or the computer development. I mean, in 1968, the PC didn't come out until the what was it? The 80s and 90s. I mean, all of this has been recent. I mean, it's been in my lifetime. I'm 66 years old. I was born in 1954. And it just blows my mind to see all the ways this has developed. And here we are, basically living in the Matrix, living in a computer simulation, and looking at unnatural weather and beaming, what I call beaming, and I quit talking about it on YouTube because I came under so much attack, and so I left it alone. But it's still there, and it hasn't stopped, and it's not going to stop. It's not going to go away, and it has an effect on the weather, the climate. It has an effect on the planet. It has an effect on our psyches and all the different manipulations. It has an effect on our emotions, and look at the anger level around the planet. And all I have to do is change the frequencies in one area, and we can see it. You can look on NASA Worldview and see it. You can look on Zoom Earth and see it. And the only antidote I know is prayer and just getting right with God and Jesus. That's all I know. And, the divine protection of God. And that's why I've gotten so deep into this Christian walk. And I've gotten deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And I know I've lost a lot of viewers and people, but, that's okay. Everyone has to find their own way, and this is my journey, and this is what I find helps me to cope. And a lot of prayer, constant prayer, and having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ of Nazareth, who came to save us, who died on the cross, was resurrected, he ascended. If you want to know about ascension, study the life of Jesus, study Jesus. If you want to know how to ascend, follow Jesus. And we're in the end times, and I do believe he's coming back. It can't be soon enough for me, but I'm a watch person on the wall. I've been called and been instructed and been called. This is my mission here, right at the end, to show how close we are, and to show the changes in the earth and changes in the atmosphere and the methane and different things, and keep reporting, and to let you know we're very close. And this is a spiritual battle. The world down here, the 3D reality, is run by Satan, and those of us who are believers in Jesus Christ, this is not our home, and we're headed home to the kingdom of God, and it's open for anybody if you want it, but you have to ask for it. It doesn't happen without you asking for it. And our physical bodies aren't going to make it. A lot of people talk about the rapture and stuff. I don't know if there is going to be one. I think that we can be transformed and taken up, but it's all up to God. It's God's will. It's God's will be done. And a lot of people are not going to be transformed. Their physical bodies will die. And it's a battle for the souls. We are in the final battle, the battle for the souls. And it's what you believe at the moment of death will determine what happens to your soul. And are you going to be on the fence? If you're on the fence, it's how are you going to make that decision right at the last moment? We've been given a grace period. I think the grace period is up, and I think this is why I was guided to go ahead and do part 2 and finish up this paper. And all the things that he wrote about in this paper have come to pass. The powers that be took every single worst case scenario and has developed it, and AI is running rampant with it. And the only thing that Satan can do is pervert God's natural creation. Pervert and destroy. So I recommend that if you haven't given your life to Jesus Christ, you do so now and ask for repentance and ask to be found worthy to be in God's kingdom when it comes time. There's no fighting this, there's no fixing this. It's a spiritual battle, and that's what it's coming down to right here. Guns are not going to fix anything. Politics cannot fix it. This is the end. This is the end. It's been prophesied. It's in the Bible. We're in Revelation. And the end is near. So, I love you all. I wouldn't do this if I didn't love you, if I didn't think that and hope that and pray that somebody might be listening. This might help one person out there to make their decision. So, till next time, I love you. God bless you, and I'm praying for everyone. Go in peace, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.